Dear learners, today I will take a class on uh, non-tariff barriers. Basically, this is the unit 2 of our module 9, which is basically on non-tariff. So, in module 8, we have discussed regarding what are the tariff barriers. Now, in module 9, we will try to cover all the barriers related to non-tariff. Now, in unit 1, we have already discussed about the historical background and the objectives of import quotas. Now, in this class, what I will try to explain, I try to explain the types and effects of import quotas. Now, although I have explained, what tariff and what import quotas, but let me remind what exactly it is. Now, if you go for definition of import quotas, now tariff or custom quotas specify a particular quantity of a commodity that can be imported within a country during a set period. So these quotas typically have two components. Now, what are those two components? One, you can say low or zero duty for quota amount. What does it basically implies? It implies that for that specific quantity, the import duty is either fixed at a very low rate or maybe entirely duty free. And the second part is that increased tariff beyond the quota limit. So once the quota is filled, any further import of product are subject to higher tariff rates. So that is why these quotas, import quotas or tariff quotas, are typically the result of government economic policies or trade agreement between countries. So as there is an agreement between or among the countries, those are the rate of tariff quotas are decided in those agreements. So these quotas aims to balance the benefit of allowing limited import with the need to protect domestic industries from excessive foreign competition. Now, whenever we are talking about tariff quotas and when the countries across the globe impose tariff quotas, obviously we have to see what are the advantages and disadvantages of tariff quotas. The first advantages of tariff quotas is the encourages importation without overwhelming the market. Now, tariff quota ensure that a country can import a defined quantity of goods while still protecting domestic industries. So that is the first advantage of tariff quotas. It can protect the domestic industries as well as it can ensure that the country can import a specific quantity of certain goods. Now, importing beyond that quota limit, that incurs a higher duties, making further imports less attractive. Now, foreign exchange preservation is considered as another important advantage of imposing tariff quotas or import quotas. Now, by limiting the volume of import, what we can do or what a country can do, a tariff quotas or these import quotas help to conserve essential foreign currency reserve, because for international trade every country has a desire to have a sufficient amount of foreign currency reserve. So when we want to import something from a foreign country, we have to pay in terms of their own currency. So that is why we need to have a sufficient amount of foreign currency reserve. Now, import quotas help a country to preserve the valuable foreign exchange. So this is particularly important for developing nations that face foreign exchange constraint. Now, price control on domestic goods is also considered as a important advantage of tariff quotas. So what has basically happened? The implementation of tariff quotas helps to regulate domestic prices. So since foreign products are subsidized to higher tariff beyond the quota, so domestic producers are better positioned to maintain stable pricing. So that is why since foreign products are subjected to higher tariff beyond that quota, so domestic producers are better positioned to maintain stable pricing. Now, another another advantage which which is considered to be essential for developing countries, for both for developing and developed countries to impose import quotas, is the incentive for exporting countries. The exporting countries benefit from low or zero tariff rate, so making their product more competitive in the importing country. So this incentivizes foreign producers to comply with the quota system. Now, these are the advantages of imposing tariff quotas. But the problem is that imposition of tariff quotas lead to certain disadvantages for both the importing and the exporting country. So how? We will explain. Now, so imposition of the tariff quotas results in potential negative impact on domestic industries. If the domestic industry is not competitive enough to withstand with foreign competition, even within the limit of tariff quotas, the domestic market may suffer from inefficiency or lower quality of goods, because until and unless they face some kind of competition among them, they do not incentivize to making quality product. So that is considered to be an important or significant disadvantages of tariff quotas. Now, increased prices of commodities is also considered as a disadvantage of imposing tariff quotas. So what generally happen? Domestic consumers may face higher prices for goods as the tariff quota system limits the availability of cheaper foreign product. So this can reduce consumer welfare, particularly among the low income goods. Another important disadvantage of tariff quotas is the economic inequality. So how it leads to economic inequality? This is because the benefits of low or no tariff may be more accessible to affluent section of the society, where the lower income individuals may be priced out of excess of goods. This create divide in consumer access to goods and may lead to inequality. Now, another important types of import quota is which is famously known as unilateral quotas. Now, how can we define the unilateral quota? Unilateral quota is a government imposed restriction that specifies the total quantity of a product that can be imported into the country without relying on any agreement with other nations. Now, unilateral quotas are typically implemented based on the country's internal economic policies, such as protecting domestic industries, managing balance of trade, and securing economic growth. Now, whenever you're talking about unilateral quotas can be classified into two categories. One is global quota. What is global quota? This is basically the total quantity allowed for import can be obtained from any country or combination of countries. There are no specific restriction on where the product comes from, and also the importing country has a flexibility in choosing its supplies. But the thing is that total amount of global quota is fixed, and it can be imported from either from one countries or in a combination of countries. Now, another type of unilateral quota is the allocated quota. So what is basically the allocated quota? Allocated quota is basically the total quota is divided among various exporting countries. So this distribution of quota is based on criteria like past trade volume, diplomatic relation, or trade agreement. Now, whenever we're talking about import quotas, obviously we have to discuss its advantages as well as its disadvantages. Now, bargaining power for the importing country is considered to be one of the important advantages of unilateral quotas, because it leads to, or it will give some kind of bargaining power to the importing country. How? Because the global quota system provides the importing country with greater leverage in negotiation with exporting countries. Now, as a result, the exporters may compete to offer their product at lower prices or more flexible terms in order to secure a share of the quota. Another important advantage of unilateral quota is the promotion of domestic industry. By limiting import, unilateral quota can protect domestic industries from being overwhelmed by foreign competition, especially when local producers are not yet competitive in global market. So that is another important advantage of imposing unilateral quotas by the importing country. Flexibility in sourcing is also considered as an important advantage for the importing country for imposing unilateral quota. So how with the what happened with the global quota, the importing country has the freedom to secure the product from any supplier, potentially lowering cost and increasing the diversity of supplies. So they have the flexibility, of importing from any country according to their demand. Now, although it's said that unilateral quota has some advantages for the importing country, as they put some kind of restriction on the imported goods, as well as they can put some kind of condition on the exporting countries, but the unilateral quota has also some disadvantages. So what are those advantages both for the importing and exporting country? The first disadvantages is the limited protection of domestic industries. The global quota system does not guarantee sufficient protection for domestic industries. If a significant portion of the quota is filled by low cost foreign producer, it may still impact domestic industries partially. So this is considered to be another disadvantage of unilateral quotas. Second disadvantage is the economic rigidity. So what basically happens, the allocation of quota can lead to rigidity in supply sources, especially in the case of allocated quota system. So as a result, the exporting countries might not always be most cost effective or reliable, leading to inefficient in the supply chain. So that is why economic rigidity is considered to be one of the disadvantages of unilateral quotas, which ultimately lead to inefficiency in the global supply chain, and which is globally it leads to inefficiency. Now, market distortion is also considered as an important disadvantage of unilateral quotas. So, unilateral quotas may distort market behavior, particularly if quotas are allocated for political reasons or without considering market process. So, this can result in inefficiencies such as higher production cost or low quality import. Now, potential for trade tension is also considered as another disadvantages of imposing unilateral quotas, because when importing country impose some kind of restriction in terms of unilateral quotas, it will lead to it will create some kind of tension between the importing and the exporting country. So as a result, countries affected by unilateral quota may they have the capacity, or they may retaliate with their own trade barriers, leading to deterioration in bilateral trade relation and possibly triggering a trade dispute. Now, what happened? Another important classification of import quota is the bilateral quota, and which is very popular. Now, what is bilateral quota? Bilateral quota are trade restriction negotiated between two countries. For example, there is two countries, say India and say UK or USA. Now they may have some kind of some kind of agreement between the two countries, and they can impose some kind of restriction on importing and exporting. So these kind of quotas are basically known as bilateral quotas. So under bilateral quota system, generally what happens, the importing country agrees to limit import from the exporting country to a certain quantity for a specific time period. So the terms of those quotas are typically established through diplomatic negotiation or trade agreement. So bilateral quotas are often used to manage trade relations and prevent conflict over the flow of goods between nations. Now, since we are talking about bilateral quotas, which is very popular, very usual also. So, but the problem is that imposing bilateral quota also creates certain advantages and certain disadvantages. Now, what are the advantages of bilateral quotas? Obviously, it fostering cooperative trade relation. When there is a although both the countries impose some kind of restriction, but the thing is that all as it is already written in the agreement, so it will lead to cooperative trade relation between the nations. So bilateral quotas are negotiated between the two countries, often as a part of a broader trade agreement. So this cooperative approach help to manage trade flows and can strengthen diplomatic relation. So another important advantage of bilateral quotas is the mutual benefit. Both the importing and exporting countries can benefit from the agreed upon quotas. So importer may gain access of competitive product, while exporters secure a guaranteed share of the importing country's market, because it is already written in the agreement and they know how much they have to produce to supply to that particular country. So it will give you some kind of certainty to both the importing and as well as the exporting country. Now, predictability and stability in trade is also considered to be another important advantage of bilateral quotas. So since bilateral quotas are negotiated and agreed upon, so they provide a level of stability and predictability for both importers as well as exporters. So this obviously reduces the uncertainty associated with international trade. But although bilateral quotas has some advantages both for the importing and exporting countries, but obviously it also creates some kind of inefficiencies, and which can be considered as a disadvantage of bilateral quotas. The first one is the limited flexibility for exporting countries. Now, what if exporting countries are restricted to a specific quota and cannot exceed this limit, even if demand for those products increases? So as a result, this can limit the economic growth potential of exporting countries, because they cannot export beyond their limit. Risks of trade imbalances is also considered as another disadvantage of bilateral quotas. Why? Because bilateral quota may result in trade imbalances. So if one country export are disproportionately favored over the other, so obviously this will lead to, or this will result in trade imbalances. So this can also lead to dissatisfaction among the trading partners, So ultimately it will lead to some kind of inefficiency in the production and as well as in the supply chain also. Complicated negotiation process is also considered as an important disadvantage of bilateral quotas. The process of negotiating bilateral quotas can be time consuming and complex. The terms of the agreement may also be subject to change, making it completely difficult for the businesses to plan their long-term trade strategies. Another important quota which is also very popular is a mixing quota. Now, what is mixing quota? A mixing quota is also known as an indirect quota. Is a system where a domestic producer in the importing country are required to use both domestic raw materials and imported raw material in a specific proportion. So we can also define it as the importing country mandate a blending of local and foreign inputs to produce a final product. So mixing quotas are typically used in sectors where the local economy benefit from the use of imported raw materials to complement domestic production. Now, what are the advantages of mixing quotas? The first advantage is it encourages local production. So what happens, that the requirement of domestic raw material ensures that the local industries benefit from imported input while promoting domestic production. So boost domestic employment is also considered as an important advantage of mixing quota, because it will lead to, since production will be happen, production will taken in the home country itself. So as a result, it will lead to boost in domestic employment. So mixing quota obviously encourages the use of local raw materials, which can help to create and sustain jobs in local industries, particularly in agriculture, manufacturing, or other sectors. Now, what are the disadvantages of mixing quotas? The disadvantage of mixing quotas can be considered as potential for inefficiency, difficulty in enforcement, etc. So, what is potential for inefficiency? Now, the requirement to blend domestic and foreign raw materials may lead to inefficiencies, particularly if the imported raw materials are not the most cost effective option. So, that is considered to be one of the disadvantages of mixing quotas. So, similarly, enforcing the proper proportion of domestic and imported material can be challenging, leading to potential violation or non-compliance. So, that is another disadvantage of mixing quotas. Along with mixing quotas, we need to discuss about licensing of import. That is also considered to be one of the non-tariff barriers, which is basically imposed by the importing country. Now, what is licensing of import? Licensing of import refers to the system where the government requires importers to obtain license before bringing certain goods into the country. So, this license may be issued under various conditions such as meeting specific regulatory requirements or fulfilling quotas set by the government. Now, imposing import licensing has certain disadvantages in terms of control over import and enforcement of trade policy, because import licensing gives the government control over the types of quantities of goods entering in the market, ensuring that import align with the national interest. Along with import licenses can help the government to implement and as well as to monitor trade policies more effectively, ensuring compliance with quotas and other trade restrictions. Now, import licensing also creates some kind of disadvantage in terms of administrative burden and potential for corruption. Now, how it lead to administrative burden? Because licensing process can be administratively burdensome for both the government and businesses, leading to delays in inefficiencies in trade process. It has also potential for corruption because the discretionary nature of licensing can lead to corruption, with businesses potentially engaging in rent-seeking behavior to obtain licenses. Now, since we have discussed about what are the types of import quotas or tariff quotas, now along with the types we need to discuss what is the effect of import quotas and other non-trade barriers to trade. Now, as I have already discussed, or from our previous discussions also, we all know that import quotas are a key tool in international trade policy used by the government to regulate the flow of goods into a country. So obviously, unlike tariff, which imposes taxes on import, quotas limit the quantity of goods that can be imported, thereby controlling the volume of foreign goods entering the domestic market. So as a result, although import quota aim to protect domestic industries and achieve a favorable balance of payment, they come with a variety of effects that can significantly impact the economy. So that is why this part of this lecture, what I will try to explore, the effect of import quotas on prices, production, consumption, government revenue, and balance of payment, as well as what I will try to examine. I will try to examine the broader context of non-tariff barriers to trade, including subsidies and licensing proceedings. Now, whenever we are talking about the effect of import quotas, the first effect is on price. So one of the most direct consequences of imposition of an import quota is its impact on prices. This is because before the introduction of the quota, goods were allowed to enter the market freely, typically subject to tariff. But what happened? Domestic demand for a product that could not be made through the local production was fulfilled by increase in import. However, the quota restrict the quantity of import, and as a result, the supply of the commodity decreases while the demand remain unsafe. So it will create some kind of mismatch. So as a result, what happens in the next stage, with the reduced supply, the prices of affected products tend to rise. So this happens because with fewer goods available in the market, competition decreases and sellers are able to charge higher prices. So as a result, what happens ultimately, the consumers in the importing country will face higher cost for goods, often leading to reduction in consumers' welfare. So this price increase can significantly affect the cost of living, particularly for low-income households who are more sensitive to price changes. Along with the effect of price, another important effect of import quotas is on domestic production. So import quotas can have a significant impact on domestic production. What happens when the supply of imported goods is restricted, the domestic producers are often in a position to meet the demand that would have otherwise been fulfilled by export. So as the price of the restricted good increases due to the lower supply, domestic producers, they consider it as an opportunity for higher profit. So this profit incentive can lead to increase in the production of domestic industries as they try to capitalize on the higher prices. So this phenomena is often referred to as protective effect or production effect of import quotas. So moreover, what happens? The imposition of quota can attract new entrepreneurs into the market, so increasing the number of farms within the industry. So as a result, the domestic producer may also start to produce more substitute for the restricted imported goods, further increasing the competition in the domestic market. So while this may strengthen local industries, it can also create some kind of inefficiencies if domestic farms are less competitive or less efficient than their foreign counterpart. Along with the effects of price and production, we need to analyze the effect of import quotas on consumption also. This is because the consumption of restricted goods is likely to decrease due to the higher prices resulting from import quotas. So consumers are generally, obviously they are price sensitive, and when the prices of goods increase, they tend to reduce their consumption. So the overall reduction in consumption depends on the price elasticity of demand for the restricted goods or the goods on which import quota is imposed. Now, if the goods are considered necessities, so decrease in consumption may be less pronounced, because in case of necessity goods, we know that as a students of economics, we know that necessity goods are less sensitive to prices or less elastic. However, if the goods are luxury items or non-essential, what will happen? So in that cases, the reduction of consumption could be significant or substantial. So moreover, what happens? The shift in consumption can also lead to change in consumer preference also. That is also considered to be as an effect of import quotas on tariff. So in response to the price increase, consumers may begin to substitute imported goods with domestically produced alternative or other imported goods that are subject to same quota restrictions. So this shift in demand could have a longer term effect on the consumption pattern within the country. Now, as we have already discussed, the effects of import quotas on price, then production, then consumption. Now we will try to see whether it has an effect on government revenue, because ultimately quotas are basically imposed by the respective government. So unlike tariff, which directly generate revenue for the government by taxing import, the revenue effect of import quotas is less straightforward or more difficult to quantify. So one of the key ways of government can capture revenue from import quotas is by auctioning off the import licenses. So if the government sells import licenses to domestic importers, the revenue generated from those auctions can be substantial. similar to the revenue effect of tariff. But however, in practice, most governments do not auction import licenses, and the revenue from import quota is instead captured by domestic importers or foreign exporters. So even in some cases, importer may gain windfall profit by acquiring quotas at relatively low prices and reselling them at higher prices, leading to reduction of wealth. So foreign exporter may also capture a portion of the economic benefit if they have a strong bargaining power in the import quota system. So as a result, what happens? The actual distribution of revenue from import quota is fairly, it's highly complex and may not necessarily benefit a government or domestic consumer as such as tariff would. As we have already discussed, the effects of import quotas on price, consumption, production, government revenue, we have to remember that import quota has some redistributive effect also. Because import quotas can import quotas create redistributive effect within the economy. On the one hand, domestic producers benefit from the higher prices that result from restricted import, while on the other hand, consumers bear the burden of the price increases. So the increase in prices reduces consumer surplus, which refers to the benefit, consumer receive when they pay less for a good than they are willing to pay. So ultimately, it will producers are benefited at the cost of the consumers. So meanwhile, the domestic producers experience an increase in production surplus or producer surplus, which basically refers to the benefit producers receive when they are able to sell a product at a higher price than their minimum acceptable price. So this redistribution from consumers to producers can lead to social and economic disparities, as the net gain is concerned in the hands of the producers, especially those with significant market power. Importantly, the welfare loss to consumers can exceed to the welfare gain to producers, leading to net loss in the overall social welfare which is basically known as deadweight loss. Now, tariff quotas also create some kind of effects in balance of payment. So as we have already explained in our previous modules, balance of payment is a record of country's economic transaction with the rest of the world, including import and export. Now what happens? When a country imports a goods, money flows out of the economy to the exporting country. Obviously, if the country is not exporting as much, so this creates a deficit in the balance of payment. So import quotas can help to reduce this deficit by restricting the quantity of import entering the country, thereby reducing the outflow of foreign currency. So in the short run, this can help improve the BOP by limiting import. However, the long run effect on BOP depends on the nature of the goods affected by the quota and the broader trade policies of the country. If the restricted import can critical to the domestic economy or involve intermediate goods used in the local production, so reducing import can disrupt local industries and decrease overall economic output, which could ultimately lead to negative consequences for the balance of payment. Now, as it has an effect on balance of payment, obviously the imposition of import quotas has also effect on terms of trade. And terms of trade, as we all know, it refers to the relative prices at which country can trade with export for import. So an improvement in the terms of trade means that a country can obtain more import for a given quantity of export, while a deterioration in the terms of trade means the opposite. So ultimately, import quotas can affect countries' terms of trade depending on factors such as elasticity of the offer curve, which we have already explained in our previous MOOCs, and the market power of the importing and exporting countries. Now, if importing country has monopsony power, that is the monopsony power, that is the power to influence prices due to its size or market dominance. So ultimately, in that case, the imposition of an import quota can improve the country's terms of trade by forcing exporter to lower their prices. Conversely, if the exporting country has monopoly power, the quota can result in higher prices for the importing country, worsening the terms of trade. So ultimately, the net effect on the terms of trade is thus uncertain and can vary depending on the specific market conditions. Now, along with import quotas, the other non-tariff barriers of trade also has an effect. So that is why it is called as, in addition to import quotas, there are several other non-tariff barriers to trade that government use to regulate import and export, and these non-tariff barriers can have a similar protective effect as tariff and import quotas, but they operate through different mechanisms. Now, that is one such example is the quantity restriction and licensing procedure. So under this system, what happened? Government fixed the maximum quantity of certain goods that can be imported over a specific period. So this restriction often coupled or combined with licensing system that require importers to obtain a permit to bring in goods. So ultimately, this system served to control the flow of import, allocate import permit among the various importers, and ensure that import align with country's trade and economic policies. So ultimately, in conclusion, what we can say, import quotas, including import, tariff quotas, unilateral quotas, bilateral quotas, mixing quotas, and import licensing are essential tool of trade policy used by the government to regulate international trade flows. So these tools serve various purposes, including protecting domestic industries, conserving foreign currency, and ensuring price stability. However, each type of quota comes with its advantages and disadvantages. So while this may provide short-term benefit, they can also lead to inefficiencies, market distortion, and trade conflict. So therefore, it's crucial for the government to carefully consider the implication of each quota system and adopt policies that balance protectionist goal with the need for open and competitive international trade. So that is why it said that import quotas and other non-tariff barriers to trade such as licensing procedure, foreign exchange restriction, and subsidy, it obviously play a significant role in shaping the flow of goods and services in the global economy. So while these measures are often used to protect domestic industries, reduce trade imbalances, and promote local production, they also have a range of effect on prices, production, consumption, government revenue, and a broader economic welfare of the country. So that is why the overall impact of import quotas and other trade barriers depends on certain factors which we need to examine carefully.